All right, looks like all my different boxes and things are set up and ready to go. I will just give it a minute for people to keep logging in.
¿Sí?
Sí,
¿Cómo cuánto?
la mamá
La
entró.
mamá. Yo, un muchacho ahí.
Ujú,
Quizá lo que le fue eso.
ujú.
Give it another minute or so. Oop, more people coming in, have to admit them.
En Facebook mucha gente tiene también.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It went from morning to afternoon in a matter of minutes.
All right.
All right, I think we are just about ready. One more person's just logging in for the Zoom. Others are, of course, on YouTube. So let's go ahead and get down to work. Our story so far, and yes, this is the section of the Torah where that is the most appropriate sentence. Our story so far, as we continue in Parashat Vayigash, is that Joseph has been playing a cat and mouse kind of scenario with his brothers. They have come back down. He has planted evidence to make Benjamin out to be the thief in order to test, isolate a number of different hypotheses. But what is most important is that the beginning of this Torah portion, Judah steps forward and offers his own self in defense of Benjamin. And this as a symbol from him and really the unanimity of the other brothers in defense of one of their own, moves Joseph to the point where he can no longer contain his emotions. And so we're going to begin in chapter 45 of the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, with Joseph finally revealing himself to his brothers completely. And we're going to focus on a little bit further on his relationship to his brothers, in particular his relationship to Benjamin, but in a broader sense as well about how we interpret the emotional reunion. So with that, we are going to hit verse 1 first. Sometimes it's nice to start with the first verse. And like I said, we are in chapter 45. You are welcome to follow along in whatever version of the Tanakh you have, of the Bible, but we, of course, are using Sepharia because it is a convenient use. A little bit of a trivia tidbit, the translation that is in Sepharia by default, and the one that I tend to use as well, is the new JPS translation. It came out in the 1980s. And it's generally considered to be one of the cleanest modern translations. That cleanliness, that smoothness is going to be a bit of an issue later on, and we will talk about that in order to open up our broader discussion of the text. Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone withdraw from me." So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Now remember, Joseph is the person who named his two children, Ephraim and Manasseh, basically in opposition to remembering anything about his family, as though he was forgetting them completely. It was all in the past. He had moved on with his life. And now when he is finally revealing himself to his brothers, we see nothing but emotion and a huge wave of emotion washing over him and washing over them. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still well?" But his brothers could not answer him. So dumbfounded were they on account of him. So we hear him proclaim who he is, this revelation, and the immediate question that he has is, my father still well? Now, this has been a running theme that has been part of the Joseph discussion with the brothers in his costume, in his incognito form. He has continually refocused the conversation on the state of his father. And now, of course, it's much more obvious of why he is doing that. And he is feeling perhaps guilt, perhaps happiness and anticipation that after all of this time, he will be able to be reunited with his father. Then Joseph came to his brothers. "Come forward to me." And when they came forward, he said, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now, do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. It is now 2 years that there has been famine in the land, and there are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield from tilling." We're going to pause there to understand what's going on. So notice, first of all, they are still relating to him as the vizier. He says, "Come forward," and they come forward. So this is still that same kind of relationship. But notice also that this coming forward is happening in a similar way, or similar verbiage to the coming forward that gives this parashat's name, Vayigash, the coming forward of Judah, who stepped forward to defend his brother. We are now seeing them step forward again, this time to be reunited with their brother. And notice how he moves from topic to topic in these few verses, right? Come forward, right? Don't be afraid, it's fine. I'm your brother Joseph, he repeats again. And he reminds them precisely of how he ended up being in Egypt and thus standing in front of him, right? You sold into Egypt. Now, having reminded them that he remembers being sold into Egypt, he immediately goes on to say, but don't be upset and don't criticize yourselves for having sold me, because it was God who sent me ahead of you, right? God sent me here in order to save life. So he is giving them an explanation of why he is not going to punish them, which they would probably think they deserve. After all, we know from last week's Torah portion that when they were being accosted by the crazy vizier, they immediately were thinking of the guilt that they had incurred by selling Joseph the years prior. So he knows, remember, he didn't need a translator, he knew what they were talking about. He knows that they are likely to feel sad and feel guilty because they've already exhibited that. And he is trying to diffuse that self-recrimination so that they will be able to be reunited without that overhanging specter of fear. Truth, it does take longer than just this one conversation for that specter to go away. Even when Jacob passes away, they are still concerned on that topic. But for the moment, let's focus on where Joseph is. So God sent me ahead. This is my version of events. This should put you more at ease. Know that I'm not going to punish you. And then he has to explain, what does it mean that coming here has saved life? Well, there's still going to be 5 more years of famine. So if I weren't here, the whole family would be in trouble, right? If it was 12 brothers still up in the land of Canaan and the famine had hit without me here in Egypt to arrange things, that could have been devastating, if not an extinction level event for the family of Jacob. So me coming here has worked out for the best. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over the land of Egypt. Father is an honorific term here. He's not actually saying that he's Pharaoh's dad, but he is saying that he is somebody who is being gracious and has been able to provide for Pharaoh, which of course he had, by interpreting the dream of Pharaoh and then by providing for the buildup of his granary stores and the oft-forgotten buildup of Pharaoh's personal ownership of all the land of Egypt, he has had a outsized influence over Pharaoh's success in this endeavor. Now, hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. Okay, Lord of all Egypt is perhaps, again, telling Dad a little bit of a spin on the status that Joseph enjoys, but we can understand it. When you tell your siblings to say hi to Dad, you always try to put the best foot forward. But he is trying to get the whole family to come down and be supported. And he has to tell them how that's going to happen. You will dwell in the region of Goshen, where you will be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that is yours, right? Inviting them in. We will still be together. We'll be a family, and bring all of your wealth. You don't have to liquidate it and move into the city. Remember, we talked about that was something that happened with Lot. When Lot moved into the city of Sodom, he liquidated the herds. That had been the main issue of why he had to leave Abraham in the first place. He is telling Jacob's children that their wealth, which is bound up in their herds, will be able to still be with them. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, that you and your household and all that is yours may not suffer want. You can see for yourselves, and my brother Benjamin for himself, that it is indeed I who am speaking to you. So he finishes off, as he began, bookend to this speech, I am Joseph, and he finishes with, I am Joseph. And if you don't believe me, ask Benjamin. Now, why would Benjamin be the person he's pointing to? Any hypotheses?
He would have had the closest relationship with Benjamin when Benjamin was a little brother.
Exactly. Benjamin and Joseph were raised in the same full house, meaning they had the same father and mother, Jacob and Rachel, and thus they would have been closest among all of the brothers to each other. So if anyone could vouch for Joseph, it would be Benjamin. Excuse me, let me just get this down to where we want to go. And you must tell my father everything about my high station in Egypt and all that you have seen, and bring my father here with all speed. We're not going to go into the longer discussion of Jacob being reminded of Joseph at the time of their separation, but it is an incredibly moving midrash of how parents and children can still bond together over things they studied years in past. But I want to move on to verse 14, which is the reaction of the brothers. With that, he embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. So a couple of things to point out here that the translator has taken care of for us, and we need to unpack. So first of all, embrace, the word is literally to fall upon. And to fall upon in Hebrew in this case can mean like to fall, like dropping upon something. It can also mean to collapse upon. It can also mean to fall upon as a beast of prey, as the way a lion can fall upon a deer. They are, of course, going for the idea of hug, which is perfectly fine, but we still need to remember that verb does not only mean hugging. And then also the next word that comes in, that he fell upon, that he embraced him around the neck. Curiously, as we're going to see, the word for neck that's being used with Benjamin is in the plural. For those that are watching on the screen here, right, Savrei Binyamin. Literally, if we were going to be a hyper ridiculous translator, and people are not, you would want to translate it as, and he fell upon the necks of Benjamin, his brother, which is why this is titled as, how many necks does Benjamin have? Because it sounds like Benjamin has more than one neck. But most of us will notice our neck is a singular piece attaching head to shoulders. And we know that the author knows that there is a singular form, because at the end of the verse, when Benjamin reciprocates by crying back, he cries upon Saharav, upon his neck, which is in the singular form of the word neck. So Benjamin has two necks, Joseph has one neck. It seems a little weird. And in verse 15, none of the brothers have necks, which is an odd change, right? We go from focusing on two necks with Benjamin, one neck with Joseph, and then no necks, as though they're unimportant to the weeping, even though the weeping still seems to be upon each other, as though it were some kind of embrace. So, as you can probably tell by my emphasis on this oddity of language, this is what we're going to focus on and try to unpack. But questions first on this section, anywhere between verses 1 and 15 in Genesis. Does anyone have any questions or additional comments they'd like to share on this reunion scene? Okay, so let's see what our commentators make of the many necks. Just where my participant view is, so it doesn't block the text for me.
Okay, Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, Natan.
If no one asks, I will ask. I was listening other podcasts with other interpretation about that, and I wasn't very convinced about how they explain. So I would like to hear your interpretation. When he raised Benjamin, okay,
Right.
he was the only one that really cried. The rest of the brothers, they were a little more dry. Like Joseph showed emotion, but
Mhm.
not the rest of the brothers, with the exception of Benjamin. Okay, what is your interpretation about that?
So we're going to actually see a little bit about this whole interpretation, the whole idea of who's crying and what does that represent. But before we get to other interpretation, my own feeling of the pishat in this case, of the simple meaning of the text without going into deeper interpretations, is that the brothers are simply still stunned, right? The brothers are still stunned, and they are both confused and they are afraid, right? On the one hand, Benjamin responds more with crying because this is his full brother and because he recognizes him more convincingly, and he was not a participant in the sale of Joseph. So he does not have the same amount of baggage, if you will. Whereas the other brothers are still in a state of amazement of, wait, this is Joseph, and he's saying everything is fine, and he looks like he's happy to see us, and he's hugging Benjamin, but we sold him. Can we feel the emotional release and catharsis of this reunion if we still are afraid and worried and feeling guilty for everything that happened? So at this point, at least in verse 15, their relationship still seems to be one of paralysis, because they are stunned by everything that has just happened in these verses. Now, we do see more emotion later on. But right here, I think that their emotion is frozen because they have too many conflicting emotions, and they're not sure what to make of this. So that's why it says, only then were his brothers able to speak.
So we can say that
Rabbi,
still we are in the same point that we were before they throw Joseph to the hole, when Joseph was the one that wanted to connect with the brothers more than the brothers with him.
I would not take that particular opinion. Personally, I would say that given the way that they responded in last week's Torah portion, of the feeling of guilt they had for having thrown Joseph into the pit and having sold Joseph, that they are not back to the point of having, being fine with hating him. I don't think they're back to resenting him. I don't think that they are wanting to be distant from him and he wants to be with them. I think they are just emotionally stunned. It's, if you've ever seen one of those, horrible talk shows where the person comes out and they are doing like an adoption reunion where the person gets to meet the birth parent, and one person doesn't know what they're on the show for, but one person does. The person who knows why they're at the show, they're the person who's going to cry sooner than the person for whom this is all a surprise. Right? Joseph has been preparing for this. They have not. This is all just exploding in their face, and it's like this whirlwind of emotion. And it's like the adoptive parent coming onto the show and being told, this is your kid. Well, the kid's been searching for that parent for perhaps years. The adopted parent had no idea that this was about to happen. It's not that they're not emotional. It's not that they don't want the relationship. It's just they have not had time to process to begin to allow the emotion to flow out of them. And like I said, in this particular case, there's a great deal of perhaps fear clouding their reaction. John?
Rabbi, but is this, following up on what Natan is saying, but isn't this where Benjamin first learns his brothers sold Joseph? So all of everything that everything he thought about his good brothers is now destroyed.
Not everything, right? He hopefully still had a good relationship, and he had just seen his brothers fearlessly throw themselves in front of him to try and protect him. So even though he may be finding out, we're not 100% sure whether they told him at some point, but even if this is the first time he knew about the sale of Joseph, he has witnessed them act selflessly towards him. So I don't think the sale would absolutely erase the years that they've been together, that they have been fine with him and the treatment that they have had with him. But certainly it would add another element to the emotions, yes.
It's shocking. This is an additional shock that he would suffer, that the other brothers aren't really suffering.
True, because they knew about the sale, yes.
Right.
All right, so first of all, I want to talk about other brothers, because this is not the first time that a brother has kissed a brother and cried around their neck. And the most famous, of course, is the reunion of Esau and Jacob. And in Perkei Rabbi Eliezer and in many of the other Midrashim, this is the way that reunion is described. Esau came to Jacob from Mount Seir in violent anger, contriving to slay him. As it is said, the wicked plots against the just and gnashes upon him with his teeth, taken from Psalm 37, being applied here to Esau. So the Midrash imagines Esau said, I will not slay Jacob with bow and arrows, but with my mouth and with my teeth will I slay him and suck his blood. As it is said, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Okay, so in that context, again, we have the same verb for falling upon somebody, for embracing, but it could also mean to fall upon as a hostile animal. In that section, the rabbis interpret Esau's movement as revealing his animalistic motivation, that he was trying to hit the neck and chew it. However, in our verse, same exact language, the interpretation is much more positive, right? That instead of attacking, it is meant to be this incredibly deep embrace. Why? Because the understanding of the two characters of Esau and Joseph are radically different. And so, of course, Esau is going to be interpreted differently. But it is the importance of how do we interpret the actions of others sometimes will depend upon the past relationship. And just in case you're wondering, the rest of the Midrash goes on to say, do not read, and he kissed him, but rather he bit him, which in Hebrew are very similar in terms of the words. But Jacob's neck became like ivory, and concerning him, the scripture says, Tanakh says, your neck is like a tower of ivory. The wicked's teeth became blunt, and when the wicked one saw that the desire of his heart was not realized, he began to be angry and to gnash with his teeth. As it is said, the wicked shall see it and be grieved. He shall gnash with his teeth and melt away. So Esau is crying because he just broke his teeth and because he's frustrated. And remember, of course, again, this is all meant to be as well a metaphor for the relationship between Israel and Rome. And we are imagining Rome as being Esau, and it is Rome that tries to attack us, even when it looks like they are coming in a friendly way. Remember, Rome was invited. They will eventually break their teeth on us, and we will continue to survive. That phrase, your neck is like the Tower of Ivory, hold on to that phrase. We will be coming back to it. Because...
So, but Rabbi, it's exactly the point. Like
Yeah.
there's all during the rabbis Hazal, they had an discrimination and against Esau in order to raise more the value of Yaakov, not Israel, but Yaakov. Because it's the same situation. Both Esau and both the 10 brothers, they tried to kill him, okay, in some way or the other, verbally or not. It's not like Esau had a worse relationship with Yaakov than the 10 brothers with Joseph. They were exactly the same hate relationship, okay? But with the brothers, oh, everything's okay, cool, okay. They did tshuva. And why they don't give the opportunity to Esau? Esau also offered him to be his companion and his protector with the family in the land of Israel, to be together, to try to open a new page. However, was Yaakov who turned him down. So the Hazal they're very tough with Esau than with a brother when it's the same situation.
Okay, so yes, the Chazal, the Chachamim, the sages are very tough on Esau, mostly because they view him as being a stand-in for Rome, and so they interpret his behavior very negatively in all cases. But there are some important differences as well, which is that if they're in the situation here between Joseph and Esau, it is Joseph who was the victim that is offering forgiveness and that is coming with tears and with a hug. In the story of Esau, Esau was the aggressor. Now, yes, I know some people will consider him to have been the victim because it was Jacob that stole. But in terms of the violence that was expected between the two, nobody expected Jacob to treat Esau with violence. Esau himself said, I will kill him when plotting his revenge against Jacob. So as far as where the balance of aggression would be, it is understandable that Esau would be seen as more naturally inclined to aggression than Joseph in that type of situation. But you're right. There are different ways to read Esau's character. He is not a black and white character. He is not just a mustache twirling villain. And we do have to take the interpretation of the rabbis in light of their antagonism with Rome, given Rome's behavior. But that's for the next time we come back around to the discussion of Vayishlach, when we want to talk about the relationship between Jacob and Esau next time. But for the moment, let's talk about Joseph and Benjamin. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, our verse from the Torah this week. For the temples, which were to be in Benjamin's territory and which would ultimately be laid in ruins. Meaning, why is he crying? Because as he embraces Benjamin, he sees the city of Jerusalem and he sees the two temples of Jerusalem being destroyed. He is not crying about the reunion. He is crying about the ultimate destruction that happens hundreds of years, a thousand years in the future. And Benjamin wept on his neck for the tabernacle of Shiloh, which was to be in Joseph's territory and which would ultimately be laid in ruins. So Rashi is saying, based off Genesis Rabbah 93, that they're crying not about each other, they are crying about the respective places of worship that would be in their territories. One in Joseph's territory and two in Benjamin's territory. You might also notice then, 2 verses 1, that seems to be running along that same issue of how many necks did Benjamin have? Right? In the text of the Hebrew, remember, it seems to use a plural for the necks of Benjamin. And that may be the impetus, we'll talk about that in a second, that may be the impetus for why Rashi is saying 2 temples and 1 Mishkan for the places of destruction. But I'm guessing that most of you are probably not passionately convinced by that interpretation, that this moment of reunion was just a moment of prophecy and that their tears were only about the future, not about the present or the past. So I brought a few alternative interpretations because I didn't think everyone would be satisfied with that. On his neck, right, that plural being implied, on both sides of his neck, right, seeing he embraced him from both sides, the word for neck appears in the plural form. Kuzkuni is always very nice, very likely to go for the clear kashat. He's telling us why it's plural. That's because he hugged him here and he hugged him there. A very European embrace, going from one side to the other. In a similar way, Davar says on his neck, on both sides of his neck, he fell on one side of the neck and then on the other, out of great love. So this double form of embrace is because of greater love. And that then would begin to stir in us, well, wait, if the double embrace is because of double love, then what about the lack of embracing that we're seeing later on? As Natan has already pointed out, the brothers do not embrace and weep upon Joseph's neck. So does that mean that there is some ambivalence in their reception of him? Does that mean they are not as emotionally moved? Or perhaps, Radak points out, seeing that Yosef and Binyamin were full brothers, the bond between them was stronger. They cried one after another. So the idea here being that the special embracing and crying that's mentioned for Joseph and Benjamin is not because the other brothers were unimportant or unmoved emotionally, but because the emotional bond between Joseph and Benjamin was simply stronger. And therefore the tears came more powerfully in their reunion than the reunion with the others. It's not to denigrate or take away from the relationship with the other brothers. It's simply to say this was a special relationship since they were full brothers in every sense. What are people thinking? Do we prefer the fall of the temples to explain our verse? Do we prefer the European style? Do we prefer the extra emotion? Or are we still unconvinced about what this verse means?
Actually, Rabbi, you say that the temple of Shiloh was in the area of Yosef now, correct?
Correct. That's what Rashi is saying.
So maybe we can say that both have two laws, because yes, in one hand, okay, there was a destruction in Benjamin of both temples, but in the other hand, not only was in Joseph the temple of Shiloh, but also the one of the lost tribes that after the Assyrians conquered, they become to be lost from the Judaism. So maybe both of them have two laws. That's why they did twice for one side, each side. So one side for each loss. That could be another explanation.
Well, that's true, except Benjamin seems to only weep on behalf of Joseph one for one neck. And Joseph weeps on behalf of Benjamin for two necks, at least.
Rabbi, but Benjamin suffers in the Civil War.
Right. So if we want to get into a comparison of tragedies, it's a little bit difficult. And there may be some reason, which I promise we're going to get to, of why the neck is being connected to the temple and the Mishkan. So there's a method behind Rashi's interpretation here, again, based off the Midrash of Genesis Rabbah 93, that is going to show us why he is focused only on the temples and the tabernacle as being the pre-temple form, rather than other tragedies that both the tribes of Benjamin and Joseph will face. But before we get there, we have to hear what Rabbeinu Bachia is going to try and tell us about the embrace between Benjamin and Joseph. The verse tells us that Joseph embraced Binyamin and Binyamin embraced his brother Joseph, by each one falling on the other's neck, a customary greeting amongst brothers who wanted to demonstrate their fondness for each other. All right, so he starts off with a fairly regular idea that this is how brothers show love. And by the way, for people that refuse to hug, and especially to hug a brother, understand that for most of our history, at least as Jews, but most parts of the world as well, brother hugging brother was a standard form of affection. And it's a shame that in many parts of Western Europe that it has become not as common as it should be. But Solomon refers to such an embrace, the brother and brother embrace, in Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim 8:1, when he wrote, "If only I could embrace you as I would embrace a brother who has nursed at my mother's breast." Right? The intimate relations between brothers of the same mother are also spelled out in the Torah in Deuteronomy 13:7, where the Torah describes a secret seduction to idolatrous practice by someone who is the brother of the second party by the same mother. So apparently, there was in the ancient world a feeling of much stronger attachment to that full brother, the brother from the same mother and father, than there would be from a brother from the same father, but a different mother. And it's such a powerful metaphor for affection and closeness that it's even used in the more romantic mode in Shir HaShirim, in Song of Songs. Evidently, the Torah considers the bond between two sons of the same mother as stronger than a similar bond by two sons of the same father. The reason our verse refers to two necks, to get back to our initial grammatical question, is that a person's neck consists of two parts, known as the nape, the back of the neck, and the throat, respectively. And the sides of the neck are also known, at least in the term in our verse, as being that other synonym for neck. So he finishes off by saying they are embracing more deeply because they are full brothers, and don't be bothered by the double neck thing. That's just because necks have lots of pieces, and it's perfectly normal. Question?
Yes, one. You don't think maybe, Rabbi, that he tried to justify the 10 brothers? Because I can give you a counter argument from the Torah also. Because Isaac and Ishmael were different moms, and they have a very tight relationship in the way that the Midrash say that they went together to live together after Sarah passed away, and they were together also when Abraham passed away. So they have a very strong relationship from the Torah.
That is right. We don't have to assume that this understanding is the only way to understand brothers. Certainly, what we would call a half brother in modern genealogical terms can be as close as being a full brother. But I think what Rabbeinu Bachya and the others are trying to say is that in the typical course of action, the relationship between full brothers is on average stronger than the relationship between half brothers. Whether or not that applies in every circumstance, that's down to the particulars of each relationship. And certainly we understand why the half brothers of Joseph would have a less than perfect relationship with him. Let me just scroll down and understand what we're talking about with this whole double necks equal temple thing, because I want to make sure we go back to that concept that Rashi introduced, because it's got more happening there than you might think. So Siftei Chachamim, which as I mentioned before is a super commentary, meaning it's a commentary on the commentary of Rashi, points out to us that in Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, verse 7:5, it says, "Your neck is like an ivory tower, your eyes like pools in Cheshbon, by the gate of Bat Rabim, your nose like the Lebanon tower that faces towards Damascus." Just as there, your neck refers to the temple, so too here, meaning in our verse in Genesis, it refers to the temple. Now, how do we know that the neck is like an ivory tower that's mentioned in Song of Songs is referring to the temple of Jerusalem? Rashi again tries to bring us to the Midrash. The temple and the altar, which are erect and tall, like a neck, and the chamber of hewn stone, which is one of the most famous parts of the temple complex, which is also there, made for strength and for a shield, like an ivory tower. So the Midrash considered this tower of ivory, this beautiful, strong structure that would glow with light, as being the perfect physical metaphor for the temple itself. So, with that in mind, we can then say, so if the neck is equal to the temple, and Benjamin has two necks, and Joseph has one neck, then that explains it. Two necks for Benjamin, and we're crying, the two temples that were destroyed. One neck for Joseph, who is crying, and Benjamin's crying about for the one proto-temple, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, that was also destroyed. So it seems to all make sense if you go with the metaphor. However, the Sifrei Chachamim wants us to understand that it's not quite that simple. Right? Rashi's explanation about Yosef's crying is understandable because there it is written in the plural form, but here it is written in the singular. Perhaps, however, it follows its plain meaning, right? It's just crying. The Gemara in Megillah 16b states, how many necks did Benjamin have? Meaning that there definitely seems to be some issue about the number to draw our attention to this verse. However, Rashi explains that this line should be deleted from the Gemara's text because it is normal for the scripture to refer to tzavar in the plural form. And in the broader commentary, he brings a few examples of that. So it is not the plurality, says Sifrei Chachamim, that really should have gotten our attention. It is just the crying on the neck. Rather, it seems that the following change in wording is the basis for the exposition. Regarding the other brothers, it is merely written that Yosef wept upon them. But with Benjamin, it mentions neck. Therefore, neck is to be expounded and it hints to the temple, which is called neck, as mentioned above in Shir HaShirim in the commentary on Song of Songs. So what he's trying to say here is that you might think, as I've been sort of teasing, that the reason they're going with two and one is because the plural neck and the singular neck. But not so. It's just because there is a neck mentioned for Benjamin and no neck mentioned for the other brothers. And what was unique was, of course, that Benjamin had the temple and Joseph had a similar temple-like structure, and the other brothers did not. The reason that two temples were mentioned for Benjamin and one for Joseph is because, in fact, it was so, right? Because there were two temples in Benjamin's territory and there were only one in Joseph. Not because this was learned from plural and singular forms. So he is undoing the initial glitch that got our attention, but is resolving it by saying the neck is simply a standing metaphor, and the number is because of the number of things that were destroyed in history, not because of a grammatical irregularity, because in fact it's not that irregular to use a plural form when talking about the neck. The poetry of the Bible does that from time to time, and we shouldn't make too much out of it. But the distinction between how he treats his brothers and how he treats Benjamin, that we can make something out of. That we can focus on. And that, because of the use of the word neck in general, that should make us think of Shir HaShirim, and that should make us think of the temple. Are people more convinced, less convinced? What are your thoughts?
Actually, the Jerusalem and the temple wasn't in Benjamin, it was in the border between Benjamin and Yehuda. That's why they picked, because it was a neutral city.
Right, it was no man's land technically, but it is often considered that the physical location of the temple was mostly within the territory that should have gone to Benjamin.
That was my counter argument.
Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. All right, so let's finish off then. Now that I can with my own apology out, let's finish off with this question of brotherliness that has been sort of bumping up along this entire conversation of why was this relationship so emotional? Why did it happen in all of these details? And to do that, I'm actually going to read from a more modern book. It's called Redeeming Relevance by Francis Nataf. You can also find this on Sefaria, by the way, which is a wonderful modern commentary to use. And he's going to compare their reunion to a different reunion, one that often does not get enough attention. and that is the reunion between Moses and Aaron. Remember, Moses and Aaron are brothers, full brothers. Moses and Aaron lived 40 some years apart, at least, not counting the time that Moses was apart during his infancy. And when they reunite, it's like they just meet. There's nothing going on. It's like nothing happens. No crying, no necks, no whatever. So what's going on? The comparative lack of pathos, of emotion, when Moshe and Aharon reunite after many years of separation, reveals a calm and unambivalent relationship. Right? Their relationship is not mixed up. Absent is the falling on the neck and the crying that marks the reunion of brothers and of fathers and sons in the book of Bereshit. Right? Bereshit 33:4, 45:14, 46:29. It's crying all around. The crying and the carrying on that appears in the other stories are a response to feelings of loss and regret at what could have been. In all of those cases, mistakes have been made and opportunities have been missed. And, as is the way of such situations, the feelings of loss could be fully recognized only after the changes that had taken place in the other person had been observed. Right? So we have this crying because they begin to realize what was missed because of how they had behaved in the past. And that's something they can only experience when they reach this moment of realization, having seen a change, having seen the newness, having now recognized that the person could have been like this, but wasn't. And so we suffered with those years of loss and want and deprivation and absence, and all of that can only come out at that moment. Right? This, of course, could only occur at that point of reunion. Unlike the stories in Bereshit, in Genesis, the separation of Moshe and Aharon, of Moses and Aaron, appears to have been preceded by harmony and a lack of complexity. Right? They were brothers. That was fine. Thus, whatever missed opportunities elapsed on account of their separation resulted from events outside their control. The outcome of all of this was Moshe and Aaron's emotionally uncomplicated reunion. Right? They both recognized it's not your fault that you were away. It's not my fault that you were away. I didn't sell you. I didn't betray you. I didn't cheat you. You didn't cheat me. It's just life. Right? You ended up having to go off to Midian. I ended up having to stay here. And that happened. And now that you're back, of course, I'm happy to see you. But I don't dissolve into a puddle of tears and weeping and wailing because everything that was lost, because I'm not going to cry over what wasn't my fault and what wasn't your fault. Our relationship wasn't what kept us apart. And our reunion is not signifying a new stage in our relationship. Our relationship was fine, and our relationship is fine. We don't need to shed tears over it. We can be upset that we were separated, but there doesn't need to be any massive catharsis to show that we have changed from the person who caused the separation to happen. Thoughts and reflections on that, or comments or questions? All right. So I just want to finish off with a complete change of topic. But I came across this commentary from Rashi when I was doing the research in Song of Songs, and I couldn't leave it out because it was just too good. So apech is the phrase for your nose that's used. And as anybody who's ever taken even basic Hebrew will know, the af, right, is your nose. Apech, your nose in the feminine form, right? That's your nose. But in the translations, you'll see a fight about how that should be translated. And Rashi is weighing in on the translation because apech is like a tower of Lebanon. Could be read, your nose is like a tower of Lebanon. And Rashi says, I cannot explain this to mean a nose, neither with respect to the simple meaning, the pashat, nor in reference to its allegorical meaning. For what praise of beauty is there in a nose that is large and erect as a tower? Right? Rashi, being a good European, has decided that strong noses are simply not attractive. Right? A nose that is big and bold and erect is simply not something you would ever compliment a person on if you were growing up in France in the 11th century or the 10th century.
Rabbi,
That's just not what makes for a pretty nose in that generation, in that place. So he just cannot conceive of what was common in other Mediterranean cultures. We know in particular in Roman culture and in other parts of the Middle East, where a prominent, strong nose was considered indeed to be a mark of beauty and nobility.
I was going to say, I know a number of women in Miami who will only date men with strong, large-looking noses. And they're not Jews. They're not Jews, but they look for a strong nose. Otherwise, they won't go out with the man.
But unfortunately, European culture has highly denigrated the size of a nose and the shape of a nose, and you can find wonderfully racist depictions of different types of noses and what they represent. This was quite an obsession for the Europeans in the 1800s and early 1900s, and that's continued into the modern world. And indeed, many plastic surgeons have made quite a career out of trying to give people the right nose, which usually means shortening it, smoothing it, making it reduced. And, you know, beauty is very much a culturally learned reflection. What people consider to be attractive is definitely something that is learned and not an inherent or an automatic reflection. And it is refreshing to see that Rashi weighing in on this reflects that he himself is also biased to what he would have considered beautiful in his day and age. And that does somewhat blind him to what was a foreign culture to him, the culture of King Solomon's court. And even though we share so much with the ancient world, there are certain aspects that we can't quite wrap our heads around, even a scholar as great as Rashi, simply because it is too alien for us to imagine it in that sense. Any questions or other comments either on this last little, like I said, very much off the main topic, Rashi, or on the main topic of the brothers' reunion?
I was thinking, that's why it was so quiet. I tried to figure out another counter example of brothers or siblings, could be also sisters, but I couldn't find, okay, because Rachel and Leah, they live together all the time. We don't have any details about the relationship of Ephraim and Menashe for control argument, but from all the different explanation that you bring, I think that the one that I take with me more, like more, is not only because they were real full brothers, but I think that because Benjamin was the only one that wasn't present in the cell of Joseph, and maybe he didn't know about that. Maybe he was crying for the suffering of the brother. Doesn't matter if they were from the same mother or not, but they felt maybe ashamed for the behavior of the brothers and the suffer of Joseph, and that's why he was crying.
You know, I think that's a very reasonable read of the text. Obviously, the relationship in this family is complicated. And that's, you know, they're Jewish, and a Jewish family always has some level of complicated relationships, as do all human relationships. But learning from them and learning how to look for reconciliation, after all, if even Joseph and his brothers can eventually be reconciled, then so can any other estranged family members who are having difficulty eventually hope for a positive reunion. And learning from them that it shouldn't wait until famine for people to embrace, that people should try to use more opportunities to bridge those gaps. And it may not always turn into to tears and crying. And maybe the relationship has been as good as Moses and Aaron's, but making sure that it can be maintained and strengthened and appreciated is something that we can look for in all of our relations, whether it be with siblings or parents or children or people more broadly that are our friends and others that we know. Really, the whole book of Genesis is about making the most of those relationships in all of the types that we have, so that our life becomes a much better life, and we can cry tears of joy rather than tears of regret.
And we don't need to wait until tragedy to recognize the other person and lisloach and for being lisloach and how do you say lisloach in English
For forgiveness.
and forgive the other person. Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, so that's it's important lesson. Avoid the post-mortem. Okay, in relationships.
Yes, it's much better to embrace your friend, your brother, your sister, whoever, while they are alive, than to make your amends at their tombstone.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert, for the shiur. It was very nice.
Thank you for joining us, and for everyone else as well.
We have an shiur tonight of Mishnah, correct?
That's right. Mishnah class tonight, beginning a new Masechet, a new section of Mishnah, talking again about relationships in the family, this time about levirate marriage, the brother marrying the sister-in-law. And that's going to be at 7 o'clock tonight. And we have class tomorrow for Pathways to Judaism at 6 o'clock. Take care, everyone.
Rabbi,
Thank you so much,
Rabbi,
Rabbi.
what's the Mishnah? What Mishnah?
Give them more.
Say again?
Give them more.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi.